All right, last time we started to look at these earliest civilizations that developed over time. And we looked at the Neolithic Revolution, how that kind of is a precursor to the development of complex cultures. We talked about the Americas. We talked about the first civilizations of Mexico and South America. And then we started to talk about China. Now what we're going to do today is continue this discussion, and we're going to talk about China and the earliest complex cultures there. And then we're going to move westward toward South Asia into what is today northern India and Pakistan, the Indus River Valley civilization that developed there. And then we're going to close by looking at Mesopotamia, where we see the development not only of the first Neolithic revolution that occurred there earlier than anywhere else that we know about, but also it was the site of some of the earliest complex cultures in world history. So we're going to look at Mesopotamia last. Now, we closed last time talking about how ancient Chinese historians, about 2,000 years ago or so, had talked about ancient dynasties of emperors going back centuries. And they mentioned a Xia dynasty that existed 4,000 years ago. And now, these stories were not taken at face value. They were thought to be legends because people figured that how could events that happened thousands of years before, when they don't have records, be trustworthy. But lo and behold, about 40 or 50 years ago, archaeologists working in North China, along the Yellow River Valley area, they discovered a site that was in the exact location of the capital of the ancient Xia dynasty, and that city was Erlitou. And so now historians tend to believe that even though we can't take everything that the Chinese historians said to be literally true, there are a lot of legends mixed in, obviously, but they were based on some historical fact. So the Xia dynasty. Now the Xia dynasty also marks a time when we see another big milestone in Chinese history: the introduction of bronze. Now bronze is an alloy. It's an alloy of tin and copper, and it's a very good, strong metal. And it was first this kind of technology was first developed in Mesopotamia, and so it got to China probably via the steppes of Asia, from across Asia over time. And by 2000 BC, bronze replaced stone as the main material for tools and weapons. So the 2000 BC marks also the beginning of what is called the Chinese Bronze Age. This bronze would continue to be the premier material for tools and weapons until about 700 BC, which marks the beginning of the Iron Age in China. So we're going to look at the Chinese Bronze Age, which is about the same time as the second millennium BC, before Christ. Now the Xia dynasty was based in northern China along the Yellow River, and many people believe that this Bronze Age civilization was an extension or a continuation of the Longshan culture, the Neolithic culture that had flourished in North China previously, about 2700 BC or so. Now, according to Chinese records, the Xia dynasty was replaced by a new line of kings of China called the Shang dynasty, and this occurred about 750 BC or so. Now, archaeologists have found the ancient capital of the Shang dynasty. It's a city called Anyang. Anyang is located in northern China, northwest China, along the Yellow River.
You said that was part of the Shang dynasty?
Yes, Anyang. And what's amazing about Anyang is that it's much more elaborate than Erlitou. Erlitou was a small town in comparison to Anyang. Now, Anyang, just to give you an idea, we talk about how monumental construction is linked to complex cultures. just to give you an idea, at Anyang, they found that in the middle of what was the city was a giant raised platform. In terms of, this was an area that was artificially built up so it would tower over the rest of the city, and it covered about 2.5 acres. So a building complex that was about 2.5 acres inside, and it's apparent from the excavations that this was a palace. This was a residence on a vast scale. Now, according to Chinese tradition, the Chinese were ruled by a king who is, in the Chinese tradition, the king is not just a man. He's a divine figure. And now the Chinese, traditional Chinese religion recognizes many different gods. They were polytheistic. They worshiped many different gods, but they distinguished 3 areas of the world. They had the kingdom of heaven, where the gods dwell. They believed the gods dwelled in the stars, in the skies, in the heavens. The land of the dead, which was below the earth. And then they had what they called the middle kingdom, which is where the earth, where people live, the land of the living. And the emperor was believed to have the power to connect with both the ancestors, the people who were dead, and he could also connect with the gods above. And in fact, the emperor, in traditional Chinese religion, the emperor became known as the son of heaven. He was the son of the gods. He was a divine figure and could contact the realms of the dead, the land below, the kingdom of below, and the kingdom of heaven, the land of the gods. And the importance of the kings is illustrated in the tombs. Cultures that honor the dead, that worship ancestors, and this is very much true of the Chinese, they tend to have very elaborate tombs because it's believed that when you build a tomb, you put offerings in the tomb and place items in the tomb, that you're somehow preparing that person's for the next life, for the life below, the land of the dead. And they really honored their rulers. For example, when they built next to Anyang, they found the royal burial ground, and they found these elaborate tombs. Now, a lot of these tombs are empty. In other words, tomb robbers get there and steal everything. But and that's true around the world, by the way. But they found one tomb that was not stolen, that was not cleared out by robbers. And just to give you an idea, it was built. They built the tombs directly into the ground. They built a huge, like a tumulus, like a mound, and then they would, underneath the mound, they would build like an underground chamber. Like at one of the tombs, the most elaborate tomb was dug deep into the rock, 35 to 40 feet, and inside this chamber they found massive amounts of wealth. They found jade, and they found weapons and vessels, bronze vessels, all kinds of elaborate goods. But what was most interesting was that they found 11 rows of corpses with their heads removed and heads placed on their chests. So they killed 59 people and placed them in their tomb. And the people were they included men and women, all elaborately dressed and placed in the tombs. So it's thought that what had happened is that some of the servants of the king, this tomb was of a queen. It wasn't a man, it was of a queen. It was the consort of the king. But they had placed all these bodies in the tomb, and obviously they had killed them. Now later in Chinese history, they substituted elaborate statues of people and animals rather than placing real people and animals in the tombs, which was probably if you were a servant of a wealthy person or a servant of the king, you're probably thanking your lucky stars that they, at that point in Chinese history, instead of killing everybody, they would place statues. But this was common. The burial of animals and human beings as offerings in the tombs. Now the emperor was more than just, like I said, he was a religious figure as well as a as a king, a political figure, and one of his jobs was to determine the will of the gods. Now, the Chinese developed a very interesting way of determining the will of the gods. They would sacrifice, they would kill animals, and then they would boil the animal's flesh in these giant bronze vessels, these very elaborate bronze vessels. And then somehow they determined that looking at the cracks in the bone, you know, when you boil a bone and it gets hot, it cracks. Somehow they determined that these cracks could tell you the future. And we know this because when they had a bone that had been predicted the future, that had been right, they would write on the bone. They would write on the bone, this crack shows there's going to be a famine. This crack shows there's going to be a war. This kind of crack shows that somebody in the royal household is going to die. And they would keep these bones and preserve them. Now, bones preserve over time. They're very sustainable. So archaeologists have found these oracle bones with the writing directly on them. Now, because of the toughness of these bones, we now know that the Chinese developed a system of writing during the Shang Dynasty that is still used in China today. The writing that was used on the oracle bones over 3,000 years ago is a direct ancestor of Chinese character writing that is used to this day. Now, it's much more advanced and elaborate today than it was 3,000 years ago. But it's an amazing development that Chinese culture has remained that continuous, that a writing system that was developed during the Shang Dynasty over 3,000 years ago is still basically in use today in China. Now, in China, there's no connection between the written language and the spoken word, because in Chinese writing, the characters stand for ideas, not for sounds. That's important. The reason why that's important is because with Chinese writing, with Chinese characters, the Chinese system of writing could unite all of China, despite the fact that different languages were spoken, because there was not a connection between the spoken word and the written word. The written word is all ideas. Every character stands for an idea, as opposed to a sound or a spoken language. That's why it's so difficult to transliterate Chinese writing. That's why Beijing and Peking, Mao Zedong, Mao Zedong, there's different ways of transliterating Chinese writing. Yes?
Just a quick question. The oracle bones in the bronze vessels, were they found in this tomb that you were speaking of?
They found them in tombs. They found them in archaeological excavations. Yeah, they found lots of these bones. Now, probably the Chinese used other writing materials, but they're perishable. One idea is that they might have used bamboo shoots. You can strip bamboo. Now, paper was actually invented by the Chinese, but paper wasn't invented until about the time of Christ. Prior to the development of paper, they probably used either animal skins, like making a form of parchment, or probably bamboo. Bamboo shoots can be cut and sliced and pressed into make a form of paper. But the problem with those types of materials is they're very perishable. And so if they use those kind of writing systems for everyday use, we have no evidence of that. But the bronze, the oracle bones are very strong and last over time. That's the evidence that we have that the Chinese had a system of writing during the Shang Dynasty. Now the Shang Dynasty ruled over, they ruled over directly what is today northwest China. Now it is believed that over time, the rulers of the Shang Dynasty, the kings, were able to establish their dominance over a big chunk of other parts of China, including much of the Yellow River and maybe as far south as the Yangtze River. But they established a system where the rulers of subject states were vassals of the king, and had to pay tribute in the form of maybe precious metals or in-kind gifts, and sometimes we know that the rulers of China, the Shang Dynasty rulers, would, if they wanted to honor one of their vassals, one of their subject rulers who had been particularly loyal, they would, as a show, as a token, as a gesture of support, they would give them these elaborate bronze vessels that were very hard and difficult to make. But casting these bronze vessels, so they would send them as gifts. Now the Chinese had a military class of warriors who were like the nobility of China, and they were the ones who, during the Chinese Bronze Age, were the warriors who fought for the king. Now, around 1300 BC or so, the horse was introduced to China. Now horses were first domesticated in Central Asia. The steppes of Asia are this vast plain that extends from Russia all the way to China. It's this big, vast plain in Central Asia, and it was here, probably what is today Kazakhstan, where I think Jay-Z just performed for a wedding for the dictator of Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan was where they probably first domesticated horses. I think I think one theory is about 4000 BC, about 6,000 years ago or so, they first were able to domesticate horses. Initially, horses were used for their milk and meat, along for riding. Now, by about 1300 BC, the horse was introduced to China, and the Chinese took to it like crazy. They loved horses and chariots, and probably they were probably attacked by nomads from the steppes on horses, and decided, hey, we can fight fire with fire. So they developed their own horse and chariots, and horses and chariots became so much a part of the military of China that Chinese military aristocrats were buried with their chariots. I put here from a tomb from an aristocrat. Aristocrats were so proud of their chariots and horses that when they died, they would kill the horses and place the entire chariot in the tomb so they could take it along with them. Who says you can't take it with you? They would take it along with them to the land of the dead. So horses and chariots became a big part of being a Chinese aristocrat serving for the great king of China, the emperor of China, the ruler. Now, I tell you these stories because Chinese historians love to tell stories, but the last Shang Dynasty ruler supposedly was so busy with his many women that he was sleeping with, all of his concubines, that when the barbarians attacked, he was having a sex orgy and was too busy with his sex orgy to actually defend his city. That's what the Chinese historians say. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but in Chinese history, an emperor is supposed to be a man of action who takes action, doesn't let his love life interfere with his duties. So obviously there's a moral there for Chinese. Chinese use their histories to tell stories and to teach morality. But supposedly the Shang Dynasty became corrupt and weak and too interested in their own pleasure, and eventually a new dynasty arose, the Zhao or Chao dynasty. Remember, it's hard and difficult to transliterate Chinese names, but the Chao or Zhao dynasty, according to the traditional date, about 1027 BC, they replaced the Shang dynasty and became the new rulers, the new great dynasty ruling over an empire. And they moved the capital from Anyang to Qishan. So they established a new capital. And they became the big players, the big kid on the block, the dominant power ruling over vassal states in China. And they were located in northwestern China. And now in many ways the early Chao dynasty was just a continuation of the Shang dynasty. Now the 8th century BC would mark an important departure point for Chinese history with the development of the Iron Age and a whole host of new historical developments. So we're going to pick up Chinese history beginning in the 8th century. We're going to do that at a later lecture. So we've talked about the earliest complex culture of China, which would be the Bronze Age dynasties, the Xia, the Shang, and the Western Chao or Zhao dynasty. All right. Now let's talk about India. We're going to move west, and we're going to start talking about civilizations that developed in Southern Asia. So let's see if I can get this map to work here. All right, here we go. All right, just to kind of put everything in perspective, when we talk about India and Indus River Valley civilization, China would be over here. Here's China over here. The Himalayan mountains are the mountains where the Yellow and Yangtze rivers have their origin. So this area over here would be China. So here's India, and here's the Indus River Valley. The Indus River Valley also has its origins in the Himalayan mountains, but it flows from north to south and dumps into the what would be the Indian Ocean. Well, it's called the Arabian Sea. But now, originally, the Indus River Valley was actually two rivers. Parallel to the Indus River Valley is a vast gully. It's called the Saraswati. It's an empty riverbed. At one point, there were two big rivers that flowed through the Indus River Valley. The Indus River Valley, the Indus River, and this unknown named river. About 4,000 years ago, this river stopped flowing because there was a massive earthquake in the Himalayas, and it blocked the river, and the river kind of ended up going into the Indus River Valley. So they lost a major river was lost. So when we're talking about this plain here when we talk about the rise of the earliest civilization.
Where did the dry riverbed run?
It ran. You can't see here, but it ran parallel to. Here's the Indus River, and it ran parallel to the Indus River Valley. All right, now, so we're talking about an area that is what is today Pakistan and northern India. Now, this particular part of the world, the Neolithic Revolution happened very quickly. It kind of happened really fast. And about 6,000 BC or so, that's the best estimate based on pottery and stratigraphy and chemical analysis of items. But about 6,000 BC, they began to cultivate wheat and barley, and the chicken, the pig, and the cattle were also domesticated. Now, one theory is that one reason why the Neolithic Revolution occurred so quickly and was so fast-paced in this river valley was that it was introduced from without. All these crops and animals that were domesticated all come from Mesopotamia. They all come from Western Asia. So it's believed that the technology and knowledge of how to domesticate animals and plants was introduced very quickly and implemented very quickly in the Indus River Valley about 6,000 BC. Now, the same thing happened in terms of complex culture. Around 2700 BC or so, all of a sudden we see, like out of water, we see a bunch of cities on the Indus River plain. Just all of a sudden you got cities. What had once been agricultural villages, all of a sudden you see these cities, and they're pretty nice cities too, with a central religious area, which we'll talk about, straight streets, planned cities. I mean, the houses even had indoor plumbing. So all of a sudden, about 2700 BC, boom, you got a civilization in the Indus River Valley. And again, what they think happened, was that the civilization from Mesopotamia that was already pre-existent was introduced and then transported and then adapted to quite quickly by the people who lived in the Indus River Valley. Now, there's no evidence of migration. It wasn't like a new people came to this area, but ideas and concepts and technology was just introduced on a large scale and then adapted by the people who lived in the Indus River Valley. Now, how did this happen? What's the connection between Mesopotamia and India? Now, I have this map here. like here's Mesopotamia right here. See, this is the Gulf, the Persian Gulf, and here's the Mesopotamia, and here's the Indus River Valley. But what we see happening is that from all along this region, from the Mesopotamia all the way through Iran, all the way to the Indus River Valley, we see civilizations developing. Because at the same time that the Harappan civilization, which is the Indus River Valley civilization, the exact same time that it just kind of sprung up in the Indus River Valley, we see the rise of a civilization in southern Iran, the Juraf civilization, central southern Iran. So right in this area, here's Juraf, here's Mohenjo, here's the Indus River Valley, and here's Juraf, and here's Mesopotamia. So you see there's kind of a line that connects these ancient cities, these ancient civilizations. The Juraf civilization is not in your book because it's only been excavated in the last 10 or 15 years, and the work's been done by a French and Iranian. The Iranians, for reasons you might already be aware, they don't have a lot of connections to the outside world, scholarship world, but this French team has been working and excavating in Juraf, and they found that they were building monumental, like ziggurats, like the same kind of platform temples that we find in Mesopotamia. They were building in Juraf around the same time. So you see this connection between Mesopotamia and Iran, and you also see a connection between Iran and the Indus River Valley. Now all these cities were all of them were the same. They would have a central, like a walled-off area that was separated from the rest of the city. Like Harappa, to give you an idea, at Harappa, which was one of the bigger cities, you had this large area that was built on a huge artificial platform, and it was 416 yards by 715 yards. So it was a huge rectangle, and it was surrounded by a wall. It was a walled enclosure, a wall that was 45 feet tall, a brick wall. So this area was like apportioned off from the rest of the city, and it was elevated and apportioned off, and it was in the center of the city. Now, surrounding the city, they found all kinds of different areas. One area where they had an industrial area where they had workshops. Another area that was all residential, and the residences were built all the same. They had a central courtyard. They had distinct eating areas. They had bedrooms. They had like I said, they had plumbing. They had toilets in the homes, and they had a sewage system built to make sure that the streets were clean. So it was a pretty advanced level of organization and planning. Now, these cities were all different. They're all different cities, but two of the cities were bigger than all the others. Harappa in the north and Mohenjo in the south. But the Harappa is by far the biggest of all the cities, and that's why when we talk about Indus River Valley civilization, sometimes they talk about it as Harappan civilization. It's the same civilization. Now, it's believed that what many people think, and using Mesopotamia as a model, is that you had a system in place where the farmers who lived in their settlements don't survive because they probably still lived in huts and made out of perishable materials. But it's believed that farmers who lived outside the cities provided the food for the city dwellers. And the city dwellers, it is believed, were the elites, the rulers. Now, that many people think that in this particular civilization, the rulers played some kind of religious function. The reason why they think that is that when you investigate these platforms, like Harappa, that big platform that was kind of separated from the rest of the city, what they found was that they found evidence of a huge hall they had built. That a hall that would maybe house, or not house, but provide shelter for a large number of people. They also found basins what they believe were for bathing. Now, ritual bathing was a big part of even in Hindu religion today. So they think that the elite, the priests or the religious leaders, used on this platform area, in this sacred area, would use the place to congregate, perform rituals, and have their sacred bathing, and that these elites were the ones who lived in the nice cities and the nice homes that surrounded the platform. And so the work of the farmers, the grain people raising the grain, was collected and used to feed these priests and to support them. And at the same time, the grain was used to provide food for the workmen, the craftsmen who worked in the workshops, who also provided goods for the priestly elite. That kind of system is called a redistributive system, and we'll see it in play when we talk about Mesopotamia. Well, we have a lot more records from Mesopotamia, which we'll get to later, so we can use Mesopotamia to try to provide a model to explain these civilizations where we have less written material to work with. But they think some sort of system, redistribution system, was in place in the Indus River Valley. Now they had their own writing system. They had writing, and the writing looks a lot like the script they used. Looks a lot like Mesopotamian writing. The problem is that there's just not enough of the writing. They use writing for what we call seals, seal stones. In those days, people didn't have signatures. So what they did is they would put like a writing on a ring on a stone, and then whenever they wanted to mark something as theirs, they would like put it on pottery. Like a lot of the times, people kept their goods in pottery, like in big giant vases of pottery. And so if you wanted to mark something as your own, like this belongs to me, you take your ring, your seal ring, with your special mark on it. You have writing on it in stone, maybe having a god's name or something to identify as your own signature. And then you'd press the stone into the wet clay, and then they'd bake the clay, and you'd have everything marked. Just like the same way that cowboys use, what do you call those things for their cattle? Brands. It's like, but seal stones are, and they found lots of seal stones, but they haven't found any cuneiform tablets or anything like that. So we really don't know exactly. It looks a lot like cuneiform, which was the system in use in Mesopotamia, but it has not yet been deciphered decisively. There's no consensus yet. Now, some people believe that the language of the people who lived in the Indus River Valley was Dravidian. Dravidian are the today they live in India today. Today they live in extreme southern parts of India, also called the Tamil culture. But the Dravidian India is people have noticed. The reason why they think they're Dravidian is because there seems to be a large degree of cultural continuity between the Indus River Valley and religion, even to this day in India. So they think that whoever lived there might have been people who still live in India today. Just to give you an example, one of the more frequent depictions in the art of the Indus River Valley is this figure right here, this seated figure. He's got the big horns, and he's seated and like in a lotus position, kind of like this guy. This is Shiva, and now you got Shiva here. This is a modern Shiva in Hindu religion. This is the god that is most depicted in Indus River Valley art. So it's maybe people think that some version of Shiva was worshipped in the Indus River Valley. Now he's got the big horns, and Shiva is a sex god. He's the god of sex, and traditionally in a lot of cultures, the bull is associated with male sexuality. So he's got the big bull horns, and the bull is linked, and male sexuality is linked very much to Shiva. Now Shiva's wife is Durga, and she's a what we call a fertility goddess. Also, but she's linked to female fertility, and they've found lots of stone depictions or statuettes of females where the female body parts are emphasized, large buttocks, large breasts, that sort of thing. And they found lots of these types of statuettes. So they think that maybe even in ancient times in the Indus River Valley, some version of Shiva and Durga was being worshipped by the ancient peoples there. And that's what gives many historians the idea that perhaps the people who lived there are the ancestors of some Indians today, the Dravidian peoples who live in southern India and Sri Lanka today. Now about 2000 BC or so, this Indus River Valley civilization, there are signs of problems. All of a sudden, cities get deserted and fall into disrepair, and there's evidence of population decline. So they think that what happened was that something happened. Now, one theory is that, remember that Saraswati River? One theory is when the Saraswati River was dried up by a massive earthquake, that would have had devastating results for the population, because that would, they depended, just like the Yellow River in China and the rivers in Peru, those rivers provided irrigation. They provided alluvial soil for the farms. And so when the Saraswati dried up, that would have been a severe blow to the food resources of the people of the Indus River Valley. They would have to make huge adaptations to make up for that loss of farmland and food for their civilization. Another thing that happened around 2000 BC was that there was disruption in Mesopotamia. We'll see about this later. After 2000 BC in Mesopotamia, there's evidence that there was migrations and wars, and so it's believed that trade between Mesopotamia and India really was severely curtailed, almost stopped after 2000 BC. And that would have been a big blow to the economy of India as well. So they're getting hit by these double whammies, migrations in Mesopotamia disrupting trade, environmental disaster with the loss of a river, and then beginning around 1800 BC, there's evidence that northern India and Pakistan was invaded by a wave of new people, and these new people are known as the Aryans. Now the Aryans, they spoke they were the earliest known people that we know of to speak what we call an Indo-European language. So they spoke a language that's related to German and French and English and Russian and Iranian. The word Iran comes from Aryan. So Iran is the original Aryan nation. It is, seriously. But anyway, so these Aryans came in, and they began to migrate and move in and settle in northern India. And over time, they drove out or conquered the indigenous population. That's one reason why Dravidians are all located in southern India. Many Dravidians, rather than be ruled by Aryans, just kept on moving south over the centuries until they were in the extreme southern parts of the Indian subcontinent. But the Aryans came in, and they brought their language with them. And we know that they did because their poetry is preserved. There's this set of the most ancient literature, the most ancient Indian literature is called the Rig Veda. And what they are, they're hymns to the gods. They're poetry. They're ancient hymns that are sung to honor the many gods worshipped by the Hindus. And now it's believed that these Rig Veda hymns go back to the earliest days of the Aryans, that they were brought by the Aryan invaders when they came in and conquered northern India. But they weren't written down until after they developed a writing system. Sanskrit is the system of writing that was developed in India, but it wasn't developed until about 300 BC. So it wasn't until centuries later that these poems were actually written down. It's believed that they were passed down orally by singers, by professional singers. They were sung at religious they were sung at banquets, they were sung at religious ceremonies, and that these stories and these songs and these poems were transmitted orally generation to generation before they were written down. Now the Rig Veda, what the Rig Veda tells, they provide like a insight into life in early India, and when the Aryans first came in and established themselves in India. And what we learn is that basically the Aryans were barbarians. I mean, they lived off cattle. They were horsemen. They were very proud of their chariots and their horses. Their homeland, they probably came into India from Central Asia, from what is today like Kazakhstan and Afghanistan, those areas. They had crossed over the mountains and settled in India. So they're very proud of their horses and their chariots and their cattle. And they were ruled by warlords who were called Rajas. Now Raja would eventually come to mean king. But in Vedic literature, the Raja is more like a warlord. He leads his warriors into battle. And the picture that we get of early India, let's say in about 1500, 1600 BC, after the Aryans came in and conquered this area, was that there were a bunch of tribes ruled by warlords who lived off their cattle. And what they did was they enslaved the indigenous population and worked them. That's one reason why Hitler really loved the stories of the Aryans, because he said, yeah, a master race that enslaves the inferior peoples. I love that. And that's why he decided to call his superior race the Aryans. And he didn't know anything about history, but that's why they don't use the word Aryan. It used to be fairly common to refer to Indo-European civilizations as Aryan, because that was the earliest Indo-European people that we know about. But once Hitler used the term, you can't use that term anymore, because they ever think there's some kind of skinhead who wants to like kill Jews. So they decided to get rid of that. That's why we use the term Indo-European. It used to be like 70 years ago that Aryan was a perfectly acceptable academic word, but now you can't use it anymore. Thank you, Hitler. But
do the ones that's using it today know that they're akinning themselves to?
Oh yeah. There's like some area. If you read some of the news, some of these people think that Hitler was a god. You know, they love the guy. You know, what white identity. Yeah. Anyway,
Dr. Toy, I'm sorry. I'm going to pull you back for just a second.
Sure.
Back to the cities and the structures.
Yeah.
I sort of missed part of that. What were you saying that the entire city was enclosed?
No, that area of religious activity that was the raised platform was surrounded by a brick wall.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that happens is that I mentioned this. Like one of the, I talked about how the Aryan culture was very warlike, and you know, the Rajas were proud of their ability to wage war and their horses and their chariots and stealing cattle and stealing women and drinking and partying. And one of the biggest gods they worshipped was the god Indra. Now, Indra, he's usually portrayed riding an elephant, but he was the god of thunder, but he was also the war god. So the war god was one of the main deities. Indra, during the period of the Rig Veda, was one of the main deities worshipped by the early Aryan peoples. All right, so that's some of the early history and early complex cultures of India. All right, now we're going to, if I can find it, we're going to talk about ancient Mesopotamia a little bit. All right, now let's get this map going here. All right, let's put this in perspective. Okay, here's, when we talk about Mesopotamia, we're talking about the Tigris and the Euphrates River have their origins in what is today Turkey, and they flow into the Persian Gulf. Remember, over here would be India and Iran, Jiroft and Harappa. You know, over here would be China. So, kind of put things in perspective. And then the steppes of Asia began right around here, south of the Caspian Sea and beyond. But this is the area. So you have Mesopotamia would be means the land between the rivers, the Euphrates and the Tigris. And then you also have Syria, Canaan, and over here would be Egypt. You know, we're going to be talking about this particular part of the world over the next couple of meetings. All right. Now before you can have a complex culture, many times you need to have this big change in the way that people lived. And the Neolithic Revolution, the domestication of plants and animals, it occurred in the area of Mesopotamia, in this particular part of the world, earlier than anywhere else. Some of the areas that it happened in were not directly in Mesopotamia, but in places like southeastern Turkey, to the northwest of Mesopotamia, also in what is called the Zagros Mountains. These are the mountains that separate Iraq from Iran, and also in Syria, in northern Syria. So in this particular part of the world, you see for the first time, beginning around 10,000 BC, so about 12,000 years ago or so, according to the best estimates, you see this transition taking place where people were raising crops rather than gathering them, and raising animals like donkeys, pigs, and cattle rather than just hunting them. Now, this was a process that occurred over several thousand years. And now, what's interesting is that even before they made this full transition to agriculture, they were still able to build monumental buildings. And this is just recent. This is like in the last 10 or 15 years. In southeastern Turkey, at a place called Göbekli Tepe, they have found like these huge giant pillars. There are these giant pillars that were all erected and built in a circle. I tried to get a picture of them. If you go and look up this online, you see some great pictures here. But there's these giant pillars that are decorated with animals, like with lions and tigers and so forth. So the pillars they're inscribed in stone with these beautiful pictures. And they don't know if the circles were covered with earth and were therefore enclosed, or whether or not they were open to the sky. If they're open to the sky, some people have noticed that the enclosures, there's a whole bunch of these different enclosures, they're built in alignment to I believe the dog star, which is the star that shines most brightly in the summertime. You ever heard of the dog star? I don't know. In ancient times, people didn't have a lot to do at night. They didn't have TV, so they'd look up at the stars and tell stories about the planets and the stars they could see up there. Yeah.
You're not talking about the North Star, are you?
No. I think I don't know if the dog star is the North Star.
Sirius.
It's a Sirius. That's the name of the star. Yeah. It shines most brightly in this particular part of the world around the summer solstice.
Okay.
Yeah. So they think that's why it was always linked with the growing season. People used to mark the same thing with Stonehenge. When they built these ancient monuments, they'd often build them in alignment with the movement of the sun across the sky at different times. With the different the solstices and the equinoxes and all that, and because that marks the season. A long time ago, people realized that the way that the stars move across the sky corresponds with the seasons, the growing seasons, when it's winter, when it's summer, when it's fall, and so forth. So a lot of people put two and two together and figured, oh well, the stars must determine the fate of the world below, and so that's why they think that. And they find this in many different cultures. There's Stonehenge in England. There's Woodhenge in Ohio. The mound builders of Ohio build a huge calendar, giant observatory. And then there's some people that think that this ancient monument was aligned with the stars in some way. It was a huge calendar, so to speak. But the thing about it that's most amazing is here's a culture still hunting and gathering. They haven't made the full switch to being Neolithic farmers. The Neolithic Revolution has not fully been carried out yet, but they're still able to congregate and come together and build these giant monuments. It would involve large amounts of labor. Monumental architecture always involves. You have to have organization. You have to have resources. You have to have some kind of surplus to feed everybody involved in the process. So It's an amazing thing that, and so it's the classic chicken and egg question. Do Neolithic cultures build monumental buildings? Or is it a question, the desire to build monumental buildings that lead to complex cultures? See what I'm saying? It's the old chicken and the egg question. And nobody knows the answer to that question. It's still debate. Maybe one of you will answer that question. If you want to study archaeology and anthropology and do years of research, you might be the person who has the definitive book on do monumental buildings drive the development of complex cultures, or do complex cultures build monumental buildings? But anyway, now what we see happening is that we see that when the Neolithic Revolution came into play, we see the rise of towns. And like, for example, Jericho along the Jordan River was one of the biggest towns in the world in 8000 BC. It was built. Now here again is a question. Jericho was a burial ground. Before it was a city, Paleolithic hunters for centuries buried their dead there. And then all of a sudden, around a burial ground, they built a city. And inside the city, they had a cult where they honored the dead. They would take human skulls, and they would decorate human skulls, paint them, and put lips on them, and they would place these human skulls of presumably of the dead in honorary places in their city. So then we have a question: did the desire to honor the dead and worship the dead and honor the ancestors lead to the rise of this city, this ancient Jericho, along the Jordan River? Another ancient city is in southeast Turkey called Çatalhöyük. It's a little later, 6,000 to 5,000 BC. It was a city of, like Jericho, maybe 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people. But again, all the houses were built in close proximity to each other, obviously for defense purposes, and they all opened up on the second floor. They have a lower floor, but you had to go on upstairs to get to the second floor where you could enter the homes. They all had that same plan, but it's a lot of in Çatalhöyük they found a lot of rooms that were painted with frescoes of people fighting with each other or hunting animals. They found a room, for example, that they found that human not human, but some kind of animal sacrifice took place, where they found they had places built into the floor where the blood could drain. They had a big sacrificial table built. So there were certain rooms, certain homes, certain facilities within Çatalhöyük that were dedicated to honoring whatever they worshipped. A lot of their paintings and their statuettes that are found there, a lot of them feature bulls and cows and women with very large female features. So I think that again you have like some kind of worshiping of the male-female sexual aspect. Now, the reason why people did that, it wasn't because they were pornographic or anything. It's just because a lot of different cultures historically link human sexuality with the fertility of the fields. So, just like rain falls and then plants grow, people have relations and babies come out of tummies, that sort of thing. I mean, they made that kind of connection. Just like you plant a seed into the ground, up comes a plant. A man plants a seed in a woman, out comes a baby. See, they made these connections in their mind, and that's why they linked. So they wanted fertility. They wanted the fields to grow. That's why they honored these gods, these sex gods, because they believed that these gods were responsible for ensuring a good harvest and plenty of food and prosperity for everybody in the community. All right. Now it would be along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers that we would see the development of the first really advanced complex cultures in Mesopotamia. And one of the first cities is the city of Uruk, about 4000 BC in southern Mesopotamia. Now, just recently, in the last couple of years, up in Syria, they found along a branch of the Euphrates River, they found a city that is as old as Uruk. So urbanization, the development of cities, is something that used to believe that it was only happened in ancient Sumer, in the southern part of Mesopotamia. But now beginning to think that this was a developed, that was more widespread. Because now, unfortunately, because of a war in Syria, they're probably not going to do a lot of excavations in Syria, unless anybody wants to go there, maybe dodge bullets. But Hamilcar was an exciting find because they found a wall, they found seal stones, they found a city that was as old as the oldest city in Mesopotamia, in southern Mesopotamia. So that's why it was insignificant. But they probably won't follow up on that excavation because they don't want to get shot. And here's a picture of the ancient Uruk. All right, now what we're going to see happening is that between 4000 and 3000 BC, ancient Sumer, the southern Mesopotamia, would see a whole range of important development. And one of these was the development of writing. Now we're going to take a little break now, but this is what I want you all to do. Go to the bathroom, take a drink of water, do what you do. But within your groups, I want you to think about what would be some purposes of writing in a complex culture. We talked about how the English River Valley had evidence of writing. They haven't deciphered yet. We talked about writing, the oracle bones in China. The most writing we've ever found in ancient civilization is in ancient Mesopotamia, cuneiform writing. And so what I want you to think about is what would be some of the purposes of writing in a complex culture. So within your groups, I'm going to ask a couple of your groups to provide some of your answers, but I want you to think about what would be some of the purposes, some of the uses of writing in a complex culture. So you guys think about that. We'll take about 5, 6, 7 minutes to do that, and then we'll finish up. Y'all talk some amongst yourselves. There used to be a Saturday Night Live character who would always. You guys watch that? What's that? Talk amongst yourselves. Talking clash. What was that? Okay. Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think you talked about that last time.
Yeah.
Remember that? Last spring. How you guys doing today? This is writing. What would be so what would be some activities you want to be cool and you want to have some? Religious rules, yeah, you want to have your power speed, progress. You guys you can record your what who had what They developed them over time. They developed irrigation methods over time, yeah. Oh, yeah, they had Iraq had 600 replaced. It wasn't until
I'm actually.
Well, yeah, they vary, but similar. We'll be looking at that. All right, guys. Let's see. Okay, let's do group number 4. What's group number 4? Raise your hand, group number 4. What are some things that you could use writing for if you're a complex culture?
Maybe bookkeeping, you know.
Accounts. Yeah, you got to keep accounts. That's good. That's a good thing. What else?
Government law, maybe writing out a set group of laws, maybe writing out how they organize their structure, their government.
Yeah, you're reading about. You should be reading about something like that. Who wrote a bunch of laws? Hammurabi. That's right. And later on, of course, the Hebrew Bible and the Old Testament, the Pentateuch, first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible.
Maybe
Leviticus,
Genesis,
Deuteronomy, Numbers, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy are the 3 books of law. Or what else?
storytelling, maybe.
What kind of stories do you want to transmit?
Maybe stories of great acts of heroism, or maybe
Gilgamesh.
Yeah, stories about heroes, stories about maybe moral stories, like, you know, don't be sleeping with your concubines when the barbarians attack. That kind of thing. All right, very good. You guys did a great job. Hey, anybody else want to add anything? The group number 4 is excellent. A numeral list.
Schoolwork,
What?
training younger generation to become scriptwriters.
Well, you got to train. Yeah, you got to train people how to write. That's true. That's a good thing. That's good.
It's because of the ancient cops, you get tickets.
You have to. Yeah, well, you have to have writing to make sure that the legal system works, right? Yeah.
Passing down traditions.
Practically, I think they mentioned that, but yeah, passing down traditions, yeah. This group, you guys mentioned lineages. You know, you want to record your family because you own property, right? You want to make sure that your property gets passed down to your heirs and your grandchildren. You want to put it in writing. That would be a way of ensuring it, right? So you guys came up with some good things, yeah. So those would be all be examples of how writing could be used, and everything you guys mentioned. The Mesopotamians did it. Now, we don't know as much about ancient India or China. We know that the Olmecs had writing, but we haven't deciphered it yet. So we don't know that they made the same use of writing. But we know that the ancient Mesopotamians did. Beginning with Sumer, which was the first civilization of ancient Mesopotamia, going back, well, if the records are right, 6,000 of these historians are right, 6,000 years. All right, now, what we see is that there were a whole bunch of important developments. You know, we talked about how a bunch of different things have to come together for a complex culture to rise. You know, you need to have an environment, right? And Mesopotamia, you see what was going on in this particular part of the world was that we know that the whole Near East was becoming hotter and drier during this time period. You know, everybody talks about global warming. We've been having global warming for 10,000 years. I mean, you know,
Now you're going to incur the wrath of God.
I know, but according to the scientists, the last great global ice age ended about 12,000 years ago. And during the last ice age, supposedly, what is today Saudi Arabia, all those deserts were all flourishing with lots of rainfall. They're all very green. You know, the Sahara Desert was at one time just a very verdant area with lots of rainfall. But, you know, when as things got hotter and drier, these areas like the Arabian Desert and the Sahara Desert and these deserts in Africa and Asia were created as a result of a warming climate. But you see, because of the Tigris-Euphrates River, you always have water. Because the mountains of Turkey, when they have rain in the spring, they have melting snow, and that water flows down the mountains, and they flows through the Euphrates and the Tigris, and they both drain into the Persian Gulf. And whenever there's flooding, they bring alluvial soil down from the mountains. This alluvial soil, this topsoil, goes over the land, and that's why the river valleys are very fertile and can support a large population, because it's very fertile soil. So you had an environment, because of the Tigris-Euphrates River, you had an environment where you could grow lots of food and support a large population. And we also see the development of some very important technology in this period. Very great technology. For example, they invented the plow. The plow was pulled by oxen, but it was a quick way to turn over the soil. You got to turn over the soil so you could, you turn over the soil, the grass, dies, and then it kind of provides for nutrients for the soil. It's a way of reinvigorating the soil. So plowing, using a plow driven by oxen, that was a big deal. So that was one invention in ancient Mesopotamia. Another invention was the wheel. They invented the wheel. That meant you could transport, once you have wheels, you can have wagons, you could transport food over large areas. Big, huge invention. Somebody mentioned dikes and canals and all that stuff. They were these guys in Mesopotamia were the newest innovators. They built canals, they built irrigation works. One theory is that there's even an irrigation theory of civilization that says that the priests that were the elite priests of Mesopotamia were priests because they controlled the irrigation system, and that's why they were held in such high regard, because they were in charge of overseeing massive irrigation that would lead, irrigation provide. If you can take some of that river water and build canals and waterways, you can expand the amount of land where you can grow crops and support a larger population. Now that's just a theory. I don't know if I don't think as many people believe it as they once did. But now another invention of Mesopotamia was bronze. It was in Mesopotamia that for the first time they made an alloy of tin and copper to make bronze. And of course, another technological breakthrough, is usually dated to about 3500 BC or so, was that they developed a writing system in ancient cuneiform. Ancient Mesopotamia. It's called cuneiform. Cuneiform means wedge-shaped. It's Latin. Because it used to be that all scholarly people knew Latin back when they discovered this cuneiform tablets back in the 19th century. And it's called wedge-shaped because if you look at a cuneiform tablet, the forms were made by taking a reed and making little shapes and different designs. And cuneiform, that's where we get the wedge shape in Latin, is cuneiform. Now, cuneiform is what we call a syllabic script, in the sense that every little symbol stands for a syllable. And so when you read cuneiform, you just string together the syllables to make words. Now, the great thing about cuneiform is that it's transferable to other languages. So because it's just syllables, it's broken down into syllables. So you can take those syllables and adapt them to other languages. Now, the Sumerians of ancient Sumer were the first. They were the first ones to develop cuneiform. So obviously, cuneiform was used to write down the Sumerian language. Another thing that they did was that early on they would take clay. There's lots of clay because they're next to a river, right? They would take clay and they would take wet clay and they would use wet clay as to keep records. And then they would dry it in the sun or bake it in an oven, and they'd have like a permanent record. And the thing about cuneiform clay tablets is because clay keeps. It's not like paper or bamboo or animal skin. It doesn't disappear over time. It lasts for centuries and centuries. And that's why we found more cuneiform tablets, and that's why we know so much about Mesopotamia, more than we know about a lot of other ancient civilizations, because we have literally millions of cuneiform tablets. Now here's a job for you. You know that there are thousands upon thousands of cuneiform tablets in the Baghdad Museum that have never been translated? Doesn't that inspire you to want to become an expert in translating cuneiform, and you could be the person who discovers some of the ancient script, the ancient writings that changes the whole history of the world? You could be that person. You just have to spend years studying the cuneiform, and you could be that person. But anyway, but they're actually they find all kinds of clay tablets. Only a small portion of them have actually been translated. So that's now the reason why they translated it is because cuneiform, Sumerian cuneiform, continued to be used as a language for literature all the way up until the time of Christ. At the time of Christ, there were still places in the Middle East where there were still people who could know and read and write Sumerian cuneiform. And so that's how it was able to we can learn and read it today. All right. Well, what we're going to be doing next time, we're going to run out of time for today. But what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the history of Mesopotamia, and then we're going to talk about its neighbor, an adjacent civilization that has lots of links. And that would be ancient Egypt. So we're going to do Mesopotamia and Egypt on Monday. So I hope y'all see y'all on Monday.